Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Kiss Kiss Bang Bang. So, this movie has to be, fairly hard to follow. There's so much that's in this film. I went on and I wanted to watch this movie because I've never seen it before. This is my first time ever watching it. I think if I'd gone on and probably watched this multiple times before coming on here to watch this, I would probably have a vastly different review or much more understanding of what's going on. But really, with this film, I was like, there were so many things that I questioned during it. I was like, wait a minute, why is this person to be calling this kid about this toy? Why is that happening? Wait a minute, what is the whole underwear thing? I really still didn't understand that. I didn't grasp it completely. They are to go round and round about so many dead bodies and the connection of them all and trying to figure that all out, and how we have to say that this is to have all these cases be somehow or another connected in some ways, but then it feels somehow like they're not exactly. But yeah, so we go on to this story, and I gotta say, this movie's hard to follow, but it's also this goofy, fun film. We really even have at some points where Harry is to go on and say that he is to even mess up in this film, and he is to have to correct himself at some points. We can really see how in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, how this is to be at somewhat familiar territory with Iron Man 3, because in Iron Man 3, we of course have it to where Robert Downey Jr. is to be narrating in the beginning parts of this movie, and so then I would go on and say it's well, yeah, these movies in that aspect feel familiar, but we have Robert Downey Jr., who is playing Harry, who has to narrate a little bit more to help you understand this. So this is a crime mystery film, and yeah, I may have fairly much difficulty explaining this movie once we actually get into actual spoilers, because there's a mound of just crap that has to just be within this film, and I'm just why do we have to have so much of this stuff? There's just filled to the brim within the time allotted of this movie, and so there's probably going to be something that I'm probably going to forget. But it is what it is. This review is what it is. So, with that said, I would say that this is to be a bad film, but it's probably so bad it's good. But it's still a bad film. It's definitely not a positive review. I feel like this is a bad film, but I just but you know but just go in it, just try it, just watch it out, and just go on and yeah, this is a bad film, and then I could be meh, okay. Some people might actually like this film, some people might feel like this is their favorite film, and yeah, this movie's fun, but again, to me, it's so hard to follow. You have too many dead bodies lined up for my understanding of it all, and so yeah, just a complex mystery film. So, with that said, teeing it up, what is this movie about? So, we have it to where Harry is to be Robert Downey Jr., and he is to be this magician as a kid who is to turn into a thief, then is to realize that he can transition from a thief to be an actor. And then once he is to go on and be an actor, he is to go on and instead be tied to this private investigator who is Gay Perry, who is actually Val Kilmer in this movie, who is a character that I will just be calling Perry through most of this movie, as probably when we go on and we have both Harry and Perry being rattled off in this review, I'll probably just call Robert Downey Jr. Lockhart, so that'll be a lot easier when we when people what did he say? Perry, Harry, who, Larry, Gary, somebody. So yeah, so I'll call Robert Downey Jr. Lockhart. So we also have a girl named Harmony, who is to be dealing with her own dead body at some part of this movie. And it seems that Harmony is to have a past with Lockhart. And we eventually have all these characters meet within this one party at some point in this film. And then eventually the bodies start to drop. And then there's trying to figure out how all these things are technically connected. As well as we also have a mystery author called Johnny Johnny G, that is to be consistently be referenced throughout this film. And so, but not only that, there's so much to just try to put pieces together and follow the bouncing freaking ball in this film that this movie ends up just being what it is. So a lot of people will probably have a drastically different range of really reviewing this film. Some people may go on and say that this is a awful film. Why does it exist? Some people may go on and say, no, I thoroughly enjoy this film. It's great and whatever. So really at the end of the day, go on and say that you can see this film by having me rattle off now where you can go on and possibly see this movie for free. Because really, if you go on and go through an Amazon or a certain kind of app, you in fact have to rent this for $3.99. If you want to go on to Vudu's or Amazon's, you can probably rent this movie for $3.99. So with that said, you can go onto a Google search and search the word C Movies app. So that's letter C Movies app. Hopefully you can go on and see this app, download it, and be able to watch anything you like for absolutely free. Premium access stuff, a lot of things that you would have to go on into specific apps to probably pay money for, or to probably more go on to certain exclusive apps and have to pay whatever monthly fees. So the next up app would be Fox HD Movies. You'll have a logo that says Fox HD Movies, but you'll have a title that'll say something different. It'll say Play 1080p HD Movies. But if you go on and search the words that I said at first, hopefully you can go through a Google search and find this app, hopefully be able to download it and be able to see this movie for absolutely free. And the last, but hopefully not least, app that you can possibly find and use and whatever, you can go into a Google Play Store search. Not quite sure if you're going to be able to find Kiss Kiss Bang Bang in that app specifically, but you could probably find a number of movies besides that to see for absolutely free. So going on, you can search the word in a Google Play Store called TV Crush. That's 2 words. And then you'll find an app that has the words HD Movies with a crown off to the side. Go ahead and download that app and be able to hopefully be able to see this movie for absolutely free. Kiss, kiss, bang, bang. So, now that I've said all that and gotten that out of the way, now it's time to get into spoilers and talk about this whole film. Yeah, I hope that I've kind of teed most of this movie up. We'll get into eventually going into more depth about this film, because there's a lot of... There's so much... man, I haven't had, filled to the brim so much in a movie since Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I was like, man, there's so much stuff crammed in that movie. But at least it felt that somehow that movie was visually easy to follow, where this movie just kind of is like whatever it needs to be for whatever part of the story, and then it ends. So we open this movie going into double five time territory. Let's just go into spoiler time. Spoiler time. It's about the time again to spoil this movie. Let's go into spoilers. So we open this movie with a church fair. A church fair that is to have Harry Lockhart, who is to be a magician of sorts. I believe his name is to be like Howard the Great or something like that. Then eventually he'll call himself Howard the Amazing or something like that. So we go on and we have Harry that's doing this magic trick where he is to saw a person in half. So it seems that Harmony is to go on and be the girl that is to be sawed in half. A lot of this isn't actually explained in this scene, but then eventually it'll have to be re-explained later, as well as going on and saying that Harry and Harmony have had a long history together, and a lot of times Harmony would go on and sleep with any number of guys, and eventually when her heart would be broken by those guys, Harry would have to be there to comfort her, while he's also having a Rodney or a Whiffy Stiffy, if you know what I mean, while comforting her because he's always ever wanted this girl. It's the one girl that got away. So Harry is to go on, and this trick of sawing a girl in half is to lead to Harmony all of a sudden screaming in agony as if she's really getting chopped in half. They open up the box to realize that this girl actually isn't being chopped in half, and that this girl is to mention, man, I'm going to be a really good actor somewhere down the road. And there's be this kind of upsettedness going on within this, like, hey, you messed up this trick. So, upsettedness, that's probably not even a word it did. But let's move on. So, after that whole church fair thing, we turn around and have years later, where all of a sudden we are to have Harry, who is to be a much more ballparkingly somewhere close to adult, and he is to be at some party where there's a number of actors and celebrities and famous people of sorts. And now we have to understand why he was to have even gotten to this party, which will probably at some point connect to how Harmony, who is to also be at the exact same party, how she is to also get there. And hopefully I'm going to go on and be able to explain all this. So, Harry is to be a thief, a burglar, and so Harry is to be with this partner who goes into this toy store, who is stealing this specific toy for this child, who is to want this agent toy, and Harry is to mention this Protocop toy of like, well, hey, yeah, like, this Protocop toy seems to be like something substantial, and the kid's like, no, 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 I want the agent toy. So Harry is to go on and steal, and he is to get caught, which is all of a sudden to lead Harry and his partner to have gotten shot, and then Harry has to run off and trying to find a way to hide out, and the only place that he is to really find to be able to do that is this acting audition, which of course he is to nail, because bizarrely the story is to really connect to what had just happened moments ago, to where Harry is to go on and lose his partner. And so Harry is to go on and start to cry and eventually just mention about his partner, and they're like, man, this guy's really method, like, this guy really has something, and so we should go on and really look for him for this role. So after that, Harry is to have made it to this party. So Harmony is also to be in this party, and so if I ended up mentioning Protocop before within that little toy store, come to find out Protocop was a actual live action TV series. And it seemed that this proto-cop had done so well that I guess there were toys being put out there for this TV show. Come to find out, Harmony at some point was to be living at her home, and there was to be a break-in being done by this proto-cop character in full costume, going on and stealing this girl's milk and cookies. I guess bizarrely, this is maybe right around when Christmas was to be a thing. Maybe. And so the proto-cop ends up stumbling and falling out of this balcony of this woman's home, and police are to have been called. Harmony is to be on the news talking about this whole proto-cop thing, and so we have Harlan Dexter, who is to notice this woman, like, hey, why isn't this woman in movies? Because it seems that Harmony was to only have gotten on to be in some beer commercial where she's waving, while this Lawrence Fishburne bear is to have gone on and done this line. And I say Lawrence Fishburne bear because Lawrence Fishburne is to actually do the voice of this bear, and he is uncredited for it. So, that's great. So now that I have explained all of that, isn't that wonderful? That's how Harmony was to have gotten to this party. Now I have to go on and explain the whole back history of other people. It's great. It's fan-freaking-tastic. So, Lockhart, Harry is to be at this party, and so Lockhart, who is Robert Downey Jr., because I'm going to have to go into transitioning to talk about Gay Perry now, which I will just call Perry through the rest of this movie, and then Harry will now be Lockhart for the rest of this film. Hopefully no one gets confused. So, we have it to where Perry is to be this private investigator. And so, how we get to Perry is that Lockhart is to have gotten beaten up, and Perry is to be looking on at Lockhart's injuries and is to be taking care of them. Injuries that he had gotten by this story. So, we have it to where Harmony is to have gone on and stumbled upon a collection of certain novels that were done by Johnny Garasson, Johnny G. Yeah, I don't remember the long stretch of this guy's last name because there's a ton of crap to remember anyways. So you guys can go on in the comments below, tell me exactly what this author's name is, because at least I remember technically what a good portion of this person's guy's name was, for whatever reason. Grismansner? I don't know. Anyways, so Harmony is to read this mystery book of which that she had read when she was a child, and when she, I guess, was to always escape, she was to use these books. So Harmony is to be reflecting on the story of these old books, and she is to have gotten, I guess, so drunk that she is to have passed out, and some guy was to walk in on this girl and try to take advantage of her. Lockhart is to have gone on and seen this guy touching and feeling this woman, and he, of course, is to have a history with Harmony and is to want this guy to leave. This guy, of course, is to get upset with Lockhart and want to fight him in the front yard of this place, and so Lockhart is saying, well, hey, you can try, but, like, you're not going to be able to take me down. Cue us having Lockhart being beaten to a pulp, now down on the ground, and we have it to where this guy who had taken advantage of Harmony is taking her home. Because we always have it to where Harmony is to always to leave with a douchebag guy that is to turn around and eventually have at some point Harmony making her way back to Harry, because history will always tell us that. So Lockhart is now with Perry, nursing his wounds. And so before that is to exactly happen, we also have Perry, who is talking to a guy called Dagny Shaw. And so we have this weird, bizarre comparison that Shaw is to make with Perry on how Perry can go on and see a man and immediately, like, his brain is to say, like, I want me some of that. And how when Shaw is to go on and see an elephant, he doesn't immediately think, man, I want to drain that elephant of blood so that way I can paint a room in my house. Like, Shaw doesn't make that comparison, and I guess he has to make that weird, goofy analogy for Perry, and Perry is just like, okay, what, like whatever that meant. So Sean just leaves. So Perry's now taking care of Lockhart, and we have Harlan Dexter, who I guess to really be like the host of this party, who is to look at Harry's injuries and just like, oh, like that's too bad. And then he kind of walks off. So now we have to go and explain Harlan Dexter's history of life. So, Harlan Dexter, at some point we go on and see at some rung of this movie that Harlan is to go on and be some actor of sorts that was to go on and do this film where he is to be this detective. Weirdly, we have it in some kind of bootleg copy of a VHS tape that is to be like kind of like dubbed over some like X-rated film or something like that, but still. Harlan is to be some detective within some movie, and so I guess he was to be dubbed an actor at some point. So we have Harlan that is to have this daughter named Veronica. Veronica is to have spent 10 years in Paris, and she is to go on and be trying to sue her own father. And so we have this story of this father and daughter who is going to be a focused thing for this whole entire story, as well as Lockhart is to tell you how important this is. And here's the funny thing. I'd completely forgotten all about this whole thing, and I had to backpedal and hear this whole conversation all over again, so that way I can understand what the heck that they were talking about at some portion of this movie later on. About the, oh, like, this must be, like, the whole, like, reasoning for Harlan going on and eventually having some connection maybe with his daughter or something. We'll get into that. So, anyways, we have Perry that is talking to Lockhart. Perry is mentioning that he was to have gotten paid $2,000 to go to a certain specific location at a specific time. And so Perry is going to drag Lockhart along because Lockhart is going to need some detective experience, or like basically this is the equivalent of a ride-along for those of you that don't know what that is. If someone was to go on and need some cop experience, they would go on and drive with a police officer to just kind of see or get a feel of like what their job is really like. Just kind of queue up some stories and stuff like that, and just kind of like get the feel of these people so they can go on and go into a job really understanding what exactly a cop does at points. So Harry is to go on and feel like he's possibly going to get this gig for this film or this show or this whatever, and so Lockhart is to go on and agree to go with Perry to this location. So they both go on to this location, and all of a sudden this is to have these people go here to then realize that they are to be witnesses to a body dumping of sorts. So we have both Perry and we have both Lockhart that are at this location, and they see a car being dumped into this pond, this lake, this whatever. And so they both go into this water to see if there's anybody in this car. And that leads to have Perry retrieve this woman from out of this trunk. And coincidentally, Lockhart is to realize that this girl doesn't have any panties on. And we are to have said before within the story that Veronica is to supposedly be born again, which means that this girl is to not be promiscuous, but I guess she doesn't have panties on for some reason. Like, there's a whole focus on this girl not having underwear on that I didn't quite even understand, but like eventually they still explain it in this movie, but I still didn't really get the whole connection of all of that. And so it is what it is. So we have it to where these guys are to run away from this whole thing. We have Lockhart, who is to chuck this gun, and Perry's very upset with him. We have Perry consistently calling Lockhart stupid in this film, and at some points, like, I guess I can really understand that, maybe. So we have the two running off, realizing that there are two masked men who are to see these guys here, and so they run off. So this leads Perry and Lockhart to eventually separate. We have a moment where they're bickering about that Lockhart doesn't have anything to towel off because Perry is to go and wipe himself down and then is to wipe his shoes with some other towel, and Lockhart doesn't want to go on and use the towel that Perry was to use because it's too wet, and he also didn't want to use the one that that Perry was to clean his shoes off of. And so Perry just goes on and tells Lockhart, it's like, well, hey, just stop dripping all over my car. Just figure out a way to just stop dripping all over my car. And, like, that'll figure everything out. So I'm just like, what is this movie at this point? There's so much stuff I have to rattle off here. It's ridiculous. So we go on, and there's probably already a billion things that I've already forgotten about within this film that I probably should have said at some point. So Lockhart is to go on and go to this bar. He goes on to this bar and is to meet with Harmony. And so we have Lockhart who goes to this bar, and we are to immediately think that Lockhart is to go home with Harmony. He's to finally get the girl that he's been wanting for the longest time. And at first, it seems that Lockhart and Harmony don't know one another. And then we have it to where Harmony is to remind Lockhart, like, oh yeah, we both know one another. Like, we've had a whole history, and, like, you didn't even bother to, like, remember any of this. And so Lockhart tries to play it all off, but he immediately knew who this girl was. So we have it to where it seems that Lockhart is going to finally nab this girl, but come to find out within the next morning, we actually have Lockhart who's going on with not Harmony, but Harmony's friend, who is Marla, who Lockhart doesn't even understand how he eventually ended up with this girl, and Harmony is to be very upset because it seemed that reasonably Lockhart and Harmony were going to finally work things out, and finally have them be together, to just have Lockhart go after this girl's friend instead. So now that we've gone on and rattled off all of that, we have it uh, where Harmony is going to go through her own dead body problem. And so Harmony is to go on and find out that her sister is to also be dead. Jenna. Jenna is to be Harmony's sister, and we have it to where she is to go on and kill herself. And so we have Harmony who's trying to justify that there's no way that her sister could have gone on and done herself in. There has to be some kind of reasoning behind all this, and Harmony wants to figure it all out. So, while Harmony is calling Lockhart, trying to figure this all out, we have Lockhart who is dealing with his own dead body within his own place, because it seems like the two men that were to go on and have ski masks, so these guys didn't see who they were to have immediately known that these two men were to be these two men, both Lockhart and both Perry, and so these masked men were to go and decide to dump off this body at Lockhart's place, and were to have placed some gun saying that this was the gun that was used to murder this girl. So we have it to where Harry is now calling Perry and telling him what has all gone on, that he's basically peed over this body because he, of course, was whipping it out and going for a little pee, and then he realized his body, and so he just started peeing on the body, making a big mistake. It's kind of like in the Scary Movie where we have Charlie Sheen, who is in the bathroom, and he's peeing, and then all of a sudden he hears this screaming, and then all of a sudden he's just like, he like stops mid-pee, he's like, what the heck was that? Then he goes back to peeing, and then all of a sudden another scream, and he stops mid-pee, looks, and like, it's that whole kind of thing. It's that kind of joke. So we have Harry calling Perry, and I'm going to go back to calling Robert Downey Jr. Lockhart here soon. So Perry is to go on and now, like, well, hey, we got to figure out how to dump the body because they're going to try to frame you for this thing and you're not the actual killer. So we have both these guys who dump the body and are to dump the gun. And so eventually, while all this is happening, we also have Harmony who's trying to get to Lockhart's place. So with all that happening, and them trying to get rid of this body that is by this dumpster that eventually they have to put into this truck to try to get rid of this body, and eventually gets dumped off, and the news is reporting it, all kinds of jazz is going on here. So we have at some points where Lockhart is to eventually talk to Harmony about these books, about these novels, and just kind of reflecting on them. And because Harmony wants to, like, showcase how she is to be wanting to figure out this whole mystery. And so, come to find out, like, they have it to where, I guess, within this author's book, a lot of the cases are usually, like, the first case is usually somehow connected to the other case, and eventually it seems that Lockhart is to figure out one way or another that it seems that both of these cases should probably be connected to one another, and that's another thing that, again, he calls Perry to help him understand. So now we have to figure out how all these things are all connected. So we have to go on and immediately assume that that Veronica was to have gotten killed, and so this must have some connection with her family, or so we have Harmony figure out that it seems that her sister was to have some stage name, which is to be of the last name Ames. And so we have Harry, who is to mention at the very beginning of this film that he doesn't really like this place because we have girls that are to be named Jill, but they end up spelling it very differently, where it's like Jylle, goofily enough. So, come to find out, Harmony is to have this stage name to the point of her even having a credit card with the same name. And so Harmony is to figure out that that Jenna, who is Harmony, was to go on and pay Perry to have been there at that specific time to see Veronica getting her body dropped. And so that's the connection between those two cases, because Harmony is to find out recently there was a withdrawal of $2,000, and coincidentally Perry was to find out that he was to get $2,000 to do this case. So there's the paying connection there. So Lockhart is to realize that these cases are connected, but how exactly? So Lockhart is to find out more things about Harmony's sister. And so come to find out, Harmony's sister has always ever wanted to find out who her biological father was. And so it seems that it had been drilled into her head that this biological father had to have been some actor at some point. And so going on, this actor should have actually been at some point Harlan Dexter, who is to be the guy that was to be with the girl before, who is to be Veronica, who is now dead. So, for one reason or another, we had Harmony's sister, who was pining away, thinking that this guy is to have been her biological father, to the point so much she believed this that she was to go and seek this man out at some point, and that's how all these things are connected. So it seems that we are having a theory at some point in this movie that at first that Harmony's sister was to pretend to be Harlan's biological daughter and was to have gone on and pretended to be Veronica to then get the lawsuit taken down, or the claim taken down against Harlan, and then eventually after that was to be cleared up, that Harlan was to go on and fake Harmony's sister's suicide to then get rid of her. But come to find out, the story has a much more different spin on that whole idea. So we go on and we have the story where man, so much has gone on at this point, and I'm trying to figure out exactly where within this movie we're at now. So because everything else is just kind of figuring out the mystery instead of really wanting to go on and put every chunk and piece and thing together within this film. I just want to like say the mystery of it all and just be done with it. Because it's much better than trying to go on and sing all this jazz and all this stuff that ends up getting plopped into this film. So we have at one point where Lockhart and Harmony are to be together in this film, and it seems that there is a temptation that Harmony is going to be in this bed without clothes on, and Lockhart is going to actually be in this couch sleeping nearby her, because Lockhart is to be dealing with this finger injury. Because at some point, Lockhart is to go on and try to talk to Harmony, and Harmony ends up closing this door, and Harry's finger ends up getting lobbed off because of it. So Harry ends up going to this hospital where he ends up getting all this pain medication, and he gets his finger sewn back on, and Harmony is to go to her work, and eventually that's when they end up getting the whole tape showcasing Harlan. And so after that, we have both Harmony and Lockhart, who are both in this room together, and Lockhart is going to be possibly just within this room. And so Harmony's like, well, hey, like, you can sleep in this bed with me. But then it seems that Lockhart is to have a whiffy stiffy again. And Harmony's like, well, like, you know what, you've kind of, like, he kind of touched me a little bit. And Lockhart is like, well, yeah, I touched you because there was a spider right on you. And eventually Harmony is to realize that, yeah, that's true, there was a spider. And she can trust Harry, but, like, we have Lockhart who's tempted to not be in this bed because eventually Whiffy Stiffy, and so Harmony's like, well, I could go on and do something about that. And Lockhart's like, well, what do you mean? Like, are you going to give me a handy, or are you going to give me, like, just some sympathetic thing and whatever? So it seems that we go on and finally have it to where Harry and Harmony might seal the deal here. But it is with this story. So we have it at some point where, like, we just consistently have Lockhart, Perry, and Harmony all calling one another for reasons or another, which is to lead them to eventually just keep going on and just eventually just being connected together. So the more and more that they start figuring out all this case, like, eventually they continue to call one another and are to put pieces together. So we go on and have at one point where where Lockhart and Perry are to make it to Harlan Dexter's mental hospital, where they are to realize that there are mental patients there that don't wear underwear. And so that's how they come to the connection that Veronica was not wearing underwear, even though she was born again, simply because of her possibly being a person that was to be shown as a mental patient, but then, like, maybe she was just put into a room somewhere and then she was still dead, but then, like, they put real clothes on her when they transitioned her, and that's why she didn't have underwear on. I don't know, it's a very bizarre story to try to understand. So we are to have them go on and figure out that Harmony's sister was probably portraying as Veronica while Veronica was actually dead, but come to find out another person was actually playing Veronica, and we'll get to that later. So, Harry and Lockhart and Perry are now at this mental hospital, and so they end up trying to escape this hospital to have this one guard who's to pull a gun on them, and eventually that gun is to lead a security guard to be killed, which is to also lead Lockhart and Perry to bump into the guys who were wearing the ski masks previously before. And so we have it to where Lockhart is to get away from these ski masked men and is to go on and tell Perry what is going on. So Lockhart is to scramble away from these ski masked men to be hiding out within their place, and so Lockhart is to be underneath this bed, and we have this pink-haired girl who is talking to this other guy called Mr. Fire. So Mr. Fire is talking to the pink-haired girl, and during this conversation, the pink-haired girl ends up getting shot. And so Lockhart ends up springing from underneath this bed to shoot Mr. Fire, and then is to plant the gun on this girl. As we also have Mr. Fire that is to mention to Lockhart, it's like, oh, like, I guess you've got a gun with you. Like, I guess you're a big man now that you have a gun on you. So Mr. Fire is now dead, and we also have a moment where Lockhart is to lose his finger. And so Lockhart is to try to put this finger on ice, but it seems at some point that this dog is to go on and grab this finger. And so Lockhart is now calling Perry, saying like, oh my god, like all of this had happened. And so Perry's like, well, hey, like, just go on and like wipe off all your prints. And Lockhart is saying like, well, it seems like that's going to be a problem because there is to be this dog that is to technically have my print. He's to have the finger in his mouth, and I'm trying to figure out what to do. And so we have it to where this dog is to swallow this finger, and then we have Lockhart is like, well, I guess it's resolved itself now. So all this just seems like rambling parts of this whole movie, but there's a lot to explain with this film anyways. There's so much going on, and I won't probably be reviewing this movie well, but it is what it is. So come to find out about this whole entire movie. So come to find out the real mystery is the pink-haired girl was actually to be playing as Veronica the whole entire time. So Veronica was playing up that, or the pink-haired girl was playing up that she was Veronica, and so Veronica was to supposedly be at one point seducing her own father, and we had it to where Jenna was to stumble upon this, and after seeing that whole event that was to, I guess, traumatize her, she was to go on and legitimately take her own life. And so Jenna had no real connection with this story besides her just going on and giving up her own life afterwards. And so she didn't do any underhanded things that was to make her second guess. No. She just ended up seeing this seduction being done between these two people, and she ended her life shortly thereafter that. So yeah, what a story. So now we have to go on and deal with like all the like the big chase scene and all that stuff within this movie also. So now we deal with that. So Lockhart and Perry. We have it to where Lockhart and Perry are to go on and be chased down by Harlan's people and anyone who's just kind of left on the villain side of things at this point. So Lockhart and Perry are to find themselves eventually being chased down by Harlan and his people, and we have it to where Perry is to have gotten shot and he is to supposedly be dead. But then we come to find out when Lockhart is at this hospital at the end of the film that Perry is actually still alive. And Lockhart is to even mention, like, well, yeah, Perry should have been dead, but, like, we rewrote this scene at the very end of the film to just have this be a happy ending where Perry's still alive. And so you can hate this all you want, because who cares? Like, it's just a nice ending. So after Perry is to get supposedly killed off, Lockhart is to be running off on his own, and he is to have his own injury that he thought that the bullet was to be caught by this book, but come to find out the injury is to technically still go through him, and so he's just kind of running around, possibly going to bleed to death at some point. So the reason for all of this chasing around is because we have Harmony, who was to have gone kidnapped by Harlan, because it seemed that because Harmony was supposed to have figured out and solved this whole puzzle, and so both Lockhart and Perry needed to go and find her, but Perry and Lockhart immediately think that Harmony is to have been kidnapped by Harlan, which is not actually true. Harmony was actually at her place the whole entire time, and neither one of these characters thought to just look for this character. They just immediately assumed that she was to be kidnapped by somebody, and that's why they couldn't get to her. So bizarre. So after all this chasing around, we have it at some point where Lockhart is to eventually, somehow or another, there's to be some car accidents happening to the point of some coffin is now on to be almost like falling off to the side of this bridge, and Lockhart is to now be on top of this coffin, and he is to hang on via the arm of this coffin for dear life. And so Lockhart is to go on and shoot Harlan, and is to shoot everybody left to have needed to be killed here. And so we then have it to where Lockhart can no longer hold on, and so he ends up falling, and then he ends up kind of re-meeting up with Harmony, and is to realize that he is now injured, and so now he wakes up at this hospital, and we now have it to where Lockhart is being re-met up with Perry, and like everything is going to be okay at the end of this, because all the people were to have killed off, they all solved the puzzle, and so on and so forth. God, this ending was so difficult to just go on and rattle off about. So, and then at the end of this, Lockhart is just to make this kind of ending of like, well, this is just going to be a movie about friendship, or and this and that. And Perry is to go on and tell Lockhart, it's like, hey, like, the movie's done. Like, finish this up. Because Lockhart is to be, like, doing this, like, homemade part where he's just kind of rattling off the end of this movie, and Perry's going to, like, no, like, this movie's done. Like, come on. Like, everybody go on and read all the credits. And and this and that. And so they end up ending the movie, and that's how the movie just ends. We have at some point with there being like another beer commercial at the end of this with the weird bear. There's a talk about like, I don't know why I'm doing a beer commercial because I would much rather eat fish. And he's just like, we just have this weird, bizarre beer commercial that keeps getting used throughout this film. But yeah, so other than that, just what a film. Like, I know I went on and just, I kind of gave up at some part of this review. I was like, I'm just gonna just rattle off all this stuff and just talk about this movie and just give up at some point because I'm just like, man, this movie is just too hard to go on and remember every bit of every little thing. And really, it's just like there's so many things that I know I probably forgot about this one. But also, I'm going to get the freaking heck out of here. At some point, I'm sure I'll probably have forgotten a bajillion million things. But that's the point of this review. Really going on, a lot of people probably watched the first couple of minutes of me talking about this movie's hard to follow, even to the point of me trying to rattle off and figure out everything that happens within this review. So, with that said, I tried my best, but man, this movie is to eventually be a thing where I'm like, what the heck all happened in it? Because, man, is there a lot of stuff. Uh, I think we also had Lockhart who was going on and talking to this woman that was to be friends with Harmony, and that eventually kind of jogged something out of there with the conversation between him and this girl. But yeah, but there's so many things within this film. There's so many little details and whatever. There's a lot of just so much stuff. So I've given up. I'm throwing in the towel on this one. The towel of which that Harry could not clean himself with. So with that said, somewhere ballparkingly close is a review in here somewhere. So hopefully you went on and enjoyed this for how much I was to go on like, what the is this film? So with that said, I'm going to get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.